Head of the departments, faculty members, and dear participants. I feel privileged to welcome all of you in this 5-day AICTE-sponsored Atal FGP on IoT with ML and AI. I feel honored to extend my warm welcome on behalf of ITS Engineering College to welcome you all to this national FDP. I am very happy to introduce our renowned speaker, Professor Umar Farooq. He is the head of department in Department of Electronics Engineering, AMU Aligarh. He joined Department of Electronics Engineering, Aligarh as a lecturer in 1992 and presently working as professor and head. He was awarded Commonwealth Scholar from 1999 to 2002 towards PhD at Loughborough University, UK, and a 1-year UKIERI postdoctoral fellowship in 2007-8. His broad area of research interest is signal processing with a specialization in speech recognition. Presently, he is working in the area of biomedical signal processing on 3 collaborative research projects. He has authored and co-authored more than 250 papers in reputed academic journals and conference proceedings and steered 9 researchers to PhD graduation. He is a fellow of Acoustical Society of India, ASI, and a fellow of Institution of Electronics and Telecommunication Engineer, IETE, India. He is also a senior member, IEEE, USA. Welcome once again. Thank you so much, sir, for joining our FDP program. I am very happy that you have spared your time and joining our FDP. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I would like to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to interact with the participants. And I hope that we will have a useful interactive session over here. I would like to thank Professor Monica as well as Dr. Garima for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to present the work that we have done, something about the work and some work which Dr. Garima has carried out over here. So I will be presenting some of her work as well. Thank you all. So I should start now.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So dear participants, it is really tough actually when you are talking about machine learning and you have been listening to machine learning experts since last few days. And I hope that many of those basics have been covered already. So what I plan to do is I will be quickly going through the basics, skipping some of those slides or hurriedly passing through that. Maybe I will talk more about some optimization, which probably may not be covered somewhere, going not into the details of mathematics, but giving you a sort of idea what is actually being done in machine learning in general. Then as a case study, I will try to concentrate on electroencephalogram. Of those healthcare applications that I will be going into the details. I will try to introduce to you what is this all about, what are the signals, and then a specific application on seizure detection. I will try to demonstrate over here some of those results. And if the time permits, then I will show you a simple implementation with reference to MATLAB for seizure detection, where you can use a very simple program, maybe not more than 20-30 lines program, which you can write a MATLAB code and then just click and get results from different classifiers that probably you have read till now. It's about 25 classifiers which you can actually use over there. Just click of a button. So I may go up till that particular point. That's what my plan is. this is a very common slide which we usually see. The artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning, how they are interrelated. So I'll be talking about machine learning only, some parts which overlaps with artificial intelligence and the deep learning as well. So some of those things may be touched upon, but not in detail. Now, the history of machine learning, you already know that it started in 1959, and author Samuel, he published his first work in the IBM Journal of Research, where he tried to solve a problem of checkerboard by the machine using programming. So that was the first step in this particular direction. And then since then, we have not looked back, and there have been a lot of progress in this machine learning area. Now, there are three important factors that we actually talk about in the behavior of the learned information that we are having in this particular algorithm. That is data that is consumed by the program, the matrix we would like to have, quantify the errors that we are getting, and then based upon those errors, we would try to do some optimization, try to do some sort of analysis, and develop a model which will be suitable for a specific application. Now, it is essentially a computational model that we would try to develop. And this computational model, the basic theory is unique, but for each application, the fine-tuning of model is required. So in order to fine-tune that model, or in general, we can say more technically, optimize a model based upon the examples that we are having and based upon certain performance criteria, we apply those machine learning algorithms. Now, broad areas why and where we try to do machine learning. In general, programming that we are doing, we do have knowledge of the entire things, and we hard code those knowledge in the exact form. But there are many applications where the knowledge or the information is not completely available. How the process takes place is not completely available to us. That information is still not known. For example, in the application of speech recognition. So how the speech signal is changing and how much variation from speaker to another speaker it is occurring, and how the background environment is affecting that, all those complex interactions, we don't know much how and when the characteristic will be changing. So this is where machine learning comes to our rescue. There may be places where we require some adaptive solution. For example, when I'm speaking over here, the information is packetized and it is delivered through the network to all the participants. Now, that information that we are having is going through the network, and sometimes some portion of the network may face some congestion, there may be some problem. So alternate routes has to be explored. So that solution becomes adaptive. You cannot do hard coding that this is the solution that is to be followed. Therefore, machine learning will be helpful in that particular area. Another example is the unknown terrain. For example, when we talk about the explorer sent to Mars, there the terrain is totally different, not known. So we try to navigate a robot over there. Then the information that we are gathering from the camera, from the texture analysis that we are doing, that has to be fed, and decisions have to be taken thereof straight away. So those sort of applications, machine learning is good, and that's where the application is. Maybe sometimes the data becomes so huge that conventional processing may fail. For example, we are talking about driverless car, where the information we are getting is from the audio, video, camera, constant information about the terrain, the traffic analysis, the road conditions, all those things. So those are to be done very quickly, and the data is very huge. So again, this sort of application is required over there. Knowledge discovery or predictive analysis, these are other applications. Now, in general, machine learning framework, what we have seen is we have got a set of input data. Just now you were having the lecture where you had certain set of information, and then the desired output values, numeric values or labels were given. So the input X parameter and Y output parameters are known. Our basic objective is to find the function or map the values of X onto Y successfully. And the mapping sometimes cannot be exact. It may be based upon the data set which is available, which is known as the training data set. And then we try to analyze or assess the performance of the system based upon the testing. I'm just quickly going through these things. Now, in machine learning, the basic things that we require is, first of all, we must have a model. The model can be of different types. Maybe it is a decision tree. It is based upon the hidden Markov's model. It is based upon the Bayesian theory. It is based upon the support vector machine or neural network. So we can have any of those models, but our objective is actually to optimize that model given the constraints that we are having and given the training data that we have got, such that the performance of that model based upon the test data is good. And the performance evaluation parameter, which is accuracy, precision, recall, maybe some of the square of the errors, likelihood, we can calculate, or the entropy we can calculate. So we will talk about these various evaluation or the performance metrics of the machine learning algorithms. I'll skip these things because I hope that this has been covered in detail. So there is no need for me to go into supervised, unsupervised, or semi-supervised. This is about the unsupervised learning. Essentially, what we are trying to do is to draw a decision boundary between different classes that we are having. And the basic objective of the training is to form this decision boundary. Support vector machine, in the previous lecture, you must have seen that those support vector machine, the maximum minimum values, and then the using the equations, you try to draw the hyperplane, because the data that we may have, it may be 1 dimension, 2 dimension, or in general, it will be multi-dimensional data, that information. So if it is a multi-dimensional data, then we will ultimately end up with hyperplanes, which will be separating those classes. So our basic objective remains that we try to separate out classes using a linear or a non-linear decision boundary. So in the lower case for, over here, you can see that non-linear decision boundary is there. And here it is a linear decision boundary. Simple example, if we try to avoid mathematics and talk about the decision tree, this is a simple example that I can show over here. Here, what we are trying to do is we are trying to partition this space. There are 2 classes, one shown by circle and the other by cross. And it has got two-dimensional features on one on the x-axis and y-axis. It has been now plotted. So we try to draw a line or separate these two classes by drawing subsequent lines such that in each section, the entropy that we are having or the randomness that we are having is actually reduced. So initially, when we draw this, in the first case, this line is drawn. So what we can see is in the lower portion, most of the sample points that we are having is now blue, which means that now the probability of blue becomes higher. In the second case, we draw this decision boundary. Now we are getting only blue in this subspace if we are talking about higher dimension. So in this subspace, only blue means that now this section has got an entropy or randomness equal to 0. All the samples of a single class are there. That means we will not partition this space further. We will look into another set of space where we are having random distribution, and therefore we may have something like this partitioning going on. So we can continue partitioning at different, and we can go to different levels also. So this is one sort of partition, and it is not necessary that we always have this partitioning. For example, here we can see that we can have a partition in a slightly different fashion. And some of those partitioning may be better as compared to the other. So over here, you can see that the partitioned space is using less number of boundaries, and we end up with better classification maybe. So these boundaries, for example, over here, usually we are talking about entropy. We may use entropy as a parameter which will be used to decide about the decision boundaries. Neural network has got the advantage that we have got non-linear decision boundaries possible using these neural networks, and because we do get inspired by many of our biological thing, and one of the most complex biological machine is the brain itself. So artificial neural network was actually inspired from the human brain, which tries to do massive processing and massive parallel processing, advantage being more fault tolerant. So that model, which has got weights over here, and the W0 weight, it is also known as the bias in some books you may find, or in some references, and the inputs are actually multiplied by these weights and summed up and passed through the activation function. So these activation function is usually non-linear, and we have got various possibilities over here. And based upon the activation function, we may get, and the number of layers that we have got, we may get linear to non-linear, highly complex decision boundaries. Of the most important classifier which has been used for the past 30 years or so, artificial neural network, and because of the development in the computing power that we are having, tensor processing units now coming up, apart from the GPUs, now we have got TPUs coming up, which can actually process huge amount of data. So neural networks and their real-time application is now possible nowadays. Another important topic which I think that may not be covered till now is curse of dimensionality. This is very important in the case of classification, because when we talk about classifiers, we may have single input or we may have multiple inputs. Higher the number of inputs, we think that probably more features if we extract, then it will be better. But there is the curse also of this dimensionality. If we increase that, then what actually happens, if we see this particular figure, here we can see if the samples are uniformly distributed and we have got only one sample. So this uniformly distributed samples at the distance, 3 samples over here. If we have got a 2-dimensional space, we will have a 3 by 3 matrix or a grid coming like this. And if we have a 3-dimensional feature, then it becomes a cube, and we will have actually 3 raised to the power 3 possibilities. Here 3 raised to power 2 possibility. So the number of possibilities that we can see increases as we increase the dimension. So in general, if we are having n-dimensional feature, so over here it will become huge, and that becomes very, very computationally intensive. Now, if we slightly modify the case and become more practical, we will find that the sample distribution is never uniform. It is randomly spaced, as shown here. So in this example, what is shown is that we have got 10 samples. And in the first case, it is a 1-dimensional feature space. And this feature space has been divided 1 dimension into 3 parts. So in the first part, we can see 3 features are actually selected. Now, if we have 2-dimensional space, 2D space, that means now the feature is 2-dimensional. So we have got X and Y axis shown over here. And we can now see the distribution, and we can divide this 2-dimensional space into a grid of 3 by 3. And now we can see that there are 9 spaces in which we have to do the processing and see where the sample lies. Now in the first space, we can clearly see that there is only one sample lying. That means 1 by 10th probability of finding a sample in this space. Earlier it was 3 by 10, now it becomes 1 by 10. If I further increase this dimension and go to 3-dimensional, it is possible that in this cuboid that we are having no samples present. And like this, we will have 27 different cubes present in this space if it is uniformly sampled, but 10 of them may have, or even less may have, samples in this, implying that we have got higher dimension. The data is not sufficient. So we usually want, when we are talking about learning, we actually want that the learning should be very fast, quick, and the algorithm should converge. So convergence means that we want the optimum result based upon the training data, or the separation boundary or the linear decision boundary that we were having. We would like to use that linear decision boundary. Now, we achieve this by optimization problem. And in general, we know that optimization can be a global optimization, or it can be a local optimization. In the case of global optimization, we have got this function. Let us say GW will try to have this function, which we will try to stick to, this GW function. We will like to optimize this. Now, if we see this figure, this plot that we have got, this has been plotted like this, and W is a variable that we are having from W naught going up to a higher value. And if we want to have a minimum value of GW, there are infinite number of W values that we need to choose to get the minimum value. Or we apply certain mathematical formulation to calculate the minimum. Practically speaking, we don't have a function as simple as shown over here. The function is very complex and we don't have a model for that. So what we try to do, one possibility is that all possible values of W or features that we are having, we apply and see that which is giving us the minimum function value. So over here, we can have the entire range of the samples possible from here to here and see probably that over here getting a minima somewhere, or at K we are getting the minimum value of the function, we choose that. But that requires huge number of sample points, very computationally intensive. So that global sort of scenario, taking the global scenario is very computationally intensive, and it is never implemented in machine learning optimization problem. So what we try to do is we try to have a local optimization technique in which we start with the initial single point, W0, and try to change this W0 such that the function that we are having actually keeps on decreasing. So we choose the value of W such that we change the value of W such that this value actually decreases. This is the basic objective of the optimization that we'll try to have. For example, if this is the error surface plot that I am having, and the middle point over here, the center point is the minimum error of the model that I will be having. W0 is the starting point that I am having. So I will change the points such that I actually reach to this center over here, the minima that we are having. So we start with this W0, and that W0 could be anywhere. So I can move in this direction also, or I can move from any other direction. So again, it is a research problem. What is the best way to choose the optimum initially or initial W? That is again a very difficult issue and problem dependent as well. So this is showing how we are actually updating this weight, and we keep on doing this till we reach to the minimum point of error, or till we have got the number of iterations that we have desired is fulfilled. So here, this is the initial point, the first iteration, second iteration, and so on, going up to the kth point. So this reduces the computation from those very high number to smaller numbers. But of course, these have got their own issues. An important point is that how do I update this weight? D0 or D1, D2, the values that I have shown over here, what it should be, how much it should be. Should that step that I am taking, that should be of constant length, or it should be variable? If it is constant, whether it should be small or it should be large. Now, the problem that we practically see is if the step length is too long, then the system may start oscillating and we may not reach to the minima point. We may actually oscillate around the minima point itself. If the step length is too short, then I may move very slowly. This example actually shows us the same thing, that the step length is too large. You can see that you cross the minima point, then going again over here, going again, so not reaching the minima, maybe again because the step length is large, so you may again reach to the other end. And if the step length is small, I am just applying 5 iterations starting with the initial one, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and I don't reach to the minimum point as well. So optimum step length is important over here. And how do we choose that? I'll just briefly discuss some of those issues. So what we try to introduce is a parameter which is known as a learning rate parameter alpha over here. and that alpha is multiplied by the step length that we are having. So doing some mathematical manipulation, we can actually get this particular equation. And this is how we try to update the weight that we have. Now, the question obviously comes over here is, how do I proceed? Why did I go in this direction? I could have gone to this direction, or this direction. How do I choose this? Because when I'm starting from W0, I have got infinite possibilities to move in a specific direction. So which direction I should go forward? The random search algorithm actually says that we can choose certain fixed number of directions, and those angles or directions can be changed randomly, not the number, but the direction can be changed randomly, and we choose out of those random numbers the best one. That if we are having p set of random directions, then we will try to optimize this and see that out of those p different directions from the starting point, which one is giving me the minimum value of that particular function. And we will choose that particular W and then proceed further. This is the depiction of what I was trying to say, that I'm starting from this W0. I have got possibilities, 3 possibilities. The dotted one are actually the candidate directions, the possible directions that I have explored. So 3 directions I have explored, but I found that the dark one is giving me the reduction in the error, and therefore I choose from W0, I choose that direction and go to W1. At W1 again, I then search 3 directions. Again, this is totally random. So at different angles, theta angles, we try to do this. And then again, from those 3 directions, the one which is giving me the minimum value, I then go to W2 and so on. So this is how I try to proceed in this specific direction. Now you can see that there is a lot of computational complexity present in this. Just I have given the example of 3. It is possible that I choose these 3 directions and none of them is giving me the reduction. So one possibility is that I say that, okay, I have reached the minimum value. I have reached to this bottom now, or I have reached the value. I have reached the value, and when I move in any direction, I am going up the hill. So that is one possibility. Other possibility is that I may then choose directions randomly again from the same point. For example, if I was somewhere over here and I randomly choose these directions, so all the 3 directions that I have chosen is actually increasing the error. So these modified weights that I will get is not reducing the error, but it is increasing. So I will do again, make again a random choice, and I may have then 3 different new directions. And I may then find that, okay, new directions that I have taken 3 random, one of them is giving me a better result or improvement, and I may proceed in that particular direction. So this actually algorithm works and is actually known as the random search algorithm. Another modification that we try to do is we try to standardize the value of the vector that we were having, and if we take it as a unit vector, then things becomes much more simpler, and everything actually depends upon the step length parameter alpha that we have chosen. There are a lot of modification to this which has been researched upon, and it is not necessary that we have got a fixed value of alpha. We have talked about a fixed value of alpha till now, but it can be changed adaptively And then we may have certain momentum parameters and all those things, which I won't go into detail. This is just a try example, which I tried to implement in MATLAB, and I tried to plot this curve where the function was given. And this is the starting point or the initial weights that we are having, and showing that how the weight is being changed and we are reaching to this minimum value, and how with iterations the value of the function is increasing or decreasing. So, and over here error surface, we are seeing that how it is going towards the minimum value. So this is the cost function plot history. History means we are actually having different iterations. So starting from the initial value W0, then W1, then W2. And for all those Ws, we are trying to calculate the value of the function. And then we plot that. This is another function which actually shows multiple minima and maxima. Of course, it will have a global minima, but it shows that if we are having a starting point somewhere over here, you can see, then we end up with number of iterations at a local minima. It is not the minimum of the function, but if we choose a point over here, we actually reach to the minima of this particular function. So how do we overcome this sort of problem? Or how do we identify this initial starting point? This becomes an important issue, and there are algorithms to overcome these. A very simple thing that we use is known as the gradient descent algorithm. This is the function, a simple function which is shown, and we want to go to the minimum value, that is at bottom over here. And if we try to calculate the slope of this or gradient of this, you can see that I can, if I am trying to reach, if I am having alpha value, great higher values, then the system actually is not converging. Smaller values, if I play it again, smaller value of alpha, you reach over here. But you increase alpha step size, you can see that it starts increasing and it goes out and it is not settling at the minimum value. So the choice of that alpha is important. Here, if you see the gradient which is shown, you can see the gradient, the size that is shown in red and green, positive and negative gradient. You can just see how it is changing. So if we want to minima, then the gradient or the slope is negative, and we want to reach to the minimum value over there. These are very good interactive plots. Also, if you go to the reference at the end, you can find the book. I don't think that I should invest time over here in this case classifier and then the different performance estimation technique. Now, if we talk about estimation, I don't know whether I should cover this or not. About the data set and how to test methods, and all the methods cannot be applied everywhere. There are certain advantages and disadvantages of these things. So if we talk about the data set, the simple technique is we divide the data set into training and the test set. Ratio maybe 2:1 or 60-40, 70-30, 80-20. Lot of variation is there. But if the training data is too large, then it is a good learning, better generalization. But then the estimation that you will be doing of the performance estimation of that based upon a small test set, that will not be very, very reliable. So if the test set is very small, then you don't get a reliable estimate of the performance. But if the test set is large and training set is smaller, then you don't get a good sort of training. So there is a balance to be met. In the case of fold out method, usually what we do is that training and test set are disjoint, non-overlapping sets. This is just showing a sort of apple and oranges example that was given in the previous lecture. Just a complete data set I have just shown over here, that set of apples and oranges. Now I have divided this into training set, and then I have got a test set, much smaller, and class 1 and class 2 I have separated out. So there are something which is important over here is that class 1 is overrepresented, class 2 is underrepresented. So these are also the issues that we need to tackle. There may be problems in the data itself, missing data. There may be certain outliers. So some of those discussion was there earlier. In random sampling method, what we try to do is we try to do a random sampling, and it is similar to the previous case, but then the samples are not taken from the contiguous location, but we randomly pick up those data from the entire database. For example, this one is used. Over here it is used. These are given to the test set, and rest is the training. In the next experiment, I may again randomly choose the same amount of data randomly, and in the third and so on. So I can have this process repeated k number of times. And again, in this case, training and test sets are disjoint, but they are chosen randomly, not predefined. And then we do k number of experiments and then average out the performance. So this actually is totally random in nature. So we can have more number of iterations and the performance may become more sort of reliable. Then we have another technique which is known as cross-validation, in which k-fold cross-validation and n-fold cross-validation is carried out. This is a k-fold cross-validation where we have got a 5-fold example shown over here. So again, training and test are mutually exclusive, and we have divided the data set into the training part. 1/5 we have taken into the test set, and the rest in the training. And in the next experiment, again, we are doing taking the different data set. Now, k-fold or k is equal to 5 or k is equal to 10. Usually we use this k-fold when we have got huge data set available to us, and we just do a few fold cross validation. That will be okay. But n-fold cross validation, also known as leave one out. That means I will take only one sample at a time, and then I will perform the experiment. So all the data is training except one. So that is used for the testing. This is again used for the testing. And so if there are n number of sections, so one will be used and I will perform n number of experiments over here. And then based upon those results that we are getting from that test data set, I will average it out and then give the average performance of the classifier. All of them are having their own advantages and disadvantages. Here, if you are having a huge data set, of course, n will become very large and impractical. Therefore, it may not be done in those cases. But if you are having small numbers, then that can be done, and you will actually find on the higher side some of those advantages and disadvantages. About bootstrapping method. In this case, I've just shown the data set D1, D1, D2, D3, D4, D5. And this is the training set that I have got. Out of those, 5 instances, I am using 4 of them. And 4 of them that I am using is actually, I choose first one randomly from this 5 set. So from this 5 set, first I got D2, then I replace that and I randomly choose, I get D3, then I get D5 and I get D1. So based upon this information, I do find that D4 has not occurred and therefore D4 will be put in the test set. Here, for example, in the next experiment, I got in the first draw D1 and again I got D1. So I'm getting an over-representation of D1. It is possible because as I told you that it is selection with replacement. So you select D1 set and then you replace it. So in the next draw, it is possible you get again D1. So the training set may have multiple representation of a single set. It is possible. And the test set will not have a fixed value. For example, over here, you can see that in the first case, first experiment, it was only 1 set. In the next experiment, you had 2 sets. And it is possible that you may have more sets in the subsequent one. So this can be repeated k number of times, and then the average performance can be estimated. So this method is known method. There is one problem that we usually face is known as the underfitting and the overfitting of the model, which is depicted over here. That if we try to overtrain a system, then I may have a model which is coming like this. And if it is undertrained, then it is a more sort of very general approximation, which will be giving me high amount of error, and it will have high bias and low variance. And it will give me huge amount of error. The performance will be poor, but the computational complexity of that lower order system will be much less as compared to this higher order system. The complexity is much more. We may have a 3-way split of the data as well. Usually in the case of multi-layer perceptron or deep learning, we may go for this neural networks, where we introduce a set which is known as a validation set. And validation set becomes very, very useful in a criteria which is known as the stopping criteria of the training data. So when do we stop the training or learning? So validation sets help in stopping the training process or the learning process, which is also known as the validation stop. And the division may be 60, 20, 20. It's not again fixed. Training can be 70%, 15% of the validation, 15% of the test. So you don't have a strict rule for that, but usually training is much higher as compared to validation and test set. So testing is actually once the training model has been fully trained using the training and the validation data, then we use the test data to get the result. And we must not further tune the parameters once it has been validated. So that care must be taken. About the accuracy, once we have got a model, we have optimized that model, gone through the error surface, got the minimum error with reference to the training data that we are having. Then we would like to see that how good that model performs, whether it is giving us a good result or not. Now, accuracy is the most important parameter that we talk about in classification. And we have got accuracy as true accuracy or predictive accuracy or the estimated accuracy. True accuracy is when we are testing the classifier with all the possible unseen data. When we are testing the classifier with all possible unseen data, which is practically impossible, and therefore we never get true accuracy of a classifier. We usually have got much smaller amount of test data as compared to the overall test space that is available. And hence, the accuracy that we are having is actually an estimate from the test data that we are having. It is not the exact accuracy. So this is to be taken into consideration, that it is not the perfect one. Maybe next time you take another test data, which will give us a slightly different accuracy. If it was a true accuracy, then in all the cases, it will be the same sort of result. Again, this matrix, we don't need to talk about type 1 error and type 2 error, true positive and true negative, false positive and false negative. All those things would have been possibly discussed. So I quickly move ahead. Should be okay. There is something known as true positive rate and false positive rate, which is false positive rate means false alarm rate. Nowadays, we must have heard about the COVID test, RT-PCR test going on, and a person who is not suffering from COVID or not infected from the coronavirus, and he goes for the test, and the machine or the test gives us the result that he is positive. So that positive is a false positive, because actually he is not having that problem, and that is a false alarm. Or for example, if a person is admitted in ICU and you have got an algorithm to determine the heart attack. So if your algorithm gives a siren and the person indicating that the person is having a heart attack and actually it is not, that is a false alarm. So we want that the false alarm or false positive rate should be as low as possible. Ideally, it should be 0. True positive, actually it should be 100%. The hit should be 100%. So based upon those values, we do have a lot of definitions where specificity, sensitivity, accuracy, precision, and F1 score. These are actually defined. And because of the repetition, I think that I would not invest more time over here. Now coming to the application of the machine learning to the healthcare sector. What are the possible places we can have? Now, if we talk about the data, and we in India are also talking about digitization in a big way. So the record that we will be having in the hospitals now will become e-record, electronic record, digital data. And this is what the prediction of the electronic health record market is in terms of the US dollars, billions of dollars, going up to 2024. So you can see that the market is going to increase a lot and everything is becoming more and more digital. You are having a smart watch which is generating a lot of data. Many a times it is connected to your mobile also. And in future, it is possible that if you are having an insurance, all that may be mobile, may be sending data to your insurance company, to your hospital where you're registered, and the hospital automatically detects that, okay, your BP is not properly being regulated for the past few days and you need to see the doctor. So all this information goes automatically analyzed, and it may be prompted over there in the hospital that, okay, this type of person is having a problem and he needs an appointment and he should be given a call to look after that. So this is big data, and that is what we will be doing about big data analysis and doing some analytics to analyze those data. Now, in the healthcare industry, we may talk about the improved accuracy in diagnosis. A lot of research have been recently done on automatic detection of pneumonia using chest X-ray or based upon certain test automatic detection, or based upon people have tried using saliva also that can be detect those sort of things. So machine learning can actually help to improve the accuracy, reduce the human intervention and automate that process. Medication error, you must have heard that during this COVID pandemic, the doctors, they were actually working for about 18, 19 hours, or maybe many a times they were sleeping in the hospital itself and taking care of the patients. So when you are working and you are fatigued, then you commit many times mistake in diagnosis. If you are having a computing system, then there is no fatigue related to that, and those sort of errors can be actually reduced because of human error, because of fatigue, because of differences in the opinion and all those things. So this is an area which can be improved, and AI and machine learning is helping a lot in that area. Optimum resource allocation in the hospital. This is again hospital management system that we talk about. Machine learning is very useful in that. Discovering new medical knowledge and automatic detection. About the health record, if we talk about, you can see how actually the flow goes. If a patient is having a problem, he goes to the hospital, and then the patient ID, the chief complaint, and the history of the patient is recorded. That means now we are having some digital data being generated in one form. Based upon this, we may have some initial hypothesis given by the clinician, and he may further ask some questions about the past history of the patient, whether he was suffering from any ailment, critical ailment. Family history information will be there. Social history again, whether you have traveled to a country, for example, in COVID cases, whether you have traveled to a country where there was a pandemic. So all those sort of questions will be asked again, that goes in the record. Now, based upon all these things, there may be a hypothesis. This was the initial one. You may refine this, and you may ask certain tests to be performed. Laboratory test, radiologic test, ECG, or maybe examination. Maybe you examine the chest, whether it is clear or not. So all these input, again, these things are generating medical record. So e-record is being generated, going to the system and refine your hypothesis and select a diagnosis. So based upon the diagnosis, you treat the patient, and after taking treatment for some days, you will observe the result. If the patient is in the hospital, you have got a continuous monitoring, and then you may refine upon things that, okay, now the patient is recovering, so you refine those things. But those decisions are taken based upon the entire history that you have taken and the test that you have conducted. So that amount of information that is available is huge, and many times it may be difficult for a patient to pay attention to all these variable parameters simultaneously. And this is where machine learning comes into picture. These are simple, some of those examples. One of the very common problems, diabetic retinopathy, diabetes. This is a chest X-ray showing pneumonia. These are some of those clippings where you can see that how health sector is using the machine learning tools and deep learning tools for critical analysis. These are the common medical applications where I will be concentrating on EEG only. But just to give you an idea, apart from that, The other application of brain monitoring, now I'm only talking about, not general healthcare, just brain monitoring, something known as deep brain stimulation, where now in West, in US, you have got devices claiming that you use those devices, attach it, and it will enhance your memory. So it stimulates your brain. Brain-computer interface, you must have seen people using a wheelchair, using not the voice command, not the buttons over there, but just by their brain. Or recently, you must have seen the monkey playing a game, a video game. Elon Musk company has actually done a lot of work in this AI area, and they implanted a neural implant in the brain, and they studied that and trained the brain, monkey's brain, to play a game over there. Prosthetics is a very important area which is coming up. Neurofeedback and rehabilitation therapy is a very important area which is there and which is because of the brain monitoring systems that are available. Just to give you a brief overview of what are the different brain imaging techniques. First is the electroencephalogram, which is known as the EEG, which monitors the electrical activity of the brain, and the signals you can see in the background coming over here, electrodes connected. Because of the flow of the ions in the brain, we do have magnetic activity in the brain also, and we have got the magnetoencephalogram, that is the magnetic activity of the brain. But the machine that you can see over here is pretty cumbersome. You can find that very costly machine as compared to the EEG that we are having. Electrocardiography is again getting the electrical signal from the brain, but then these are implanted electrodes. That means you have got a brain surgery to be done to put those electrodes and get that information. Of course, the advantage is that when you use these electrodes, they are embedded inside. The signal quality is very good as compared to the previous case that was on the surface. Then we may have a functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, again used to monitor brain, but again a very bulky and very costly machine. So if we are talking about a practical application, then fMRI may not be a good candidate for brain-computer interface or any sort of applications that is to be developed and used by a common person. And then functional near-infrared spectroscopy is again a portable device which actually monitors light in the wavelength of 700 to 900 nanometers and looks into the hemoglobin and the oxygenated and deoxygenated components in the hemoglobin because of the absorption of different wavelengths, and then actually calculates or depicts which area of the brain is more active, because when the brain area is active, it is consuming a lot of energy. Energy means that it requires oxygen. Oxygen concentration over there will be more, and that's how you detect that, okay, where the activity is more. If we compare these sort of things, this is a criteria which is important, whether it is an invasive technique or a non-invasive technique. So when we talk about practical application to the end user, not to the hospital, then we would always like that it should be non-invasive, it should be portable, and it should have good time and space resolution. So based upon this EEG and functional near-infrared spectroscopy, this becomes a good candidate. EEG has got a high temporal resolution, and we can increase the resolution based upon the sampling frequency, as well as the spectral resolution can be improved if we are having more electrodes over there. Talking about the brain, this is how the brain actually looks like. The frontal lobe, which actually controls our personality, the emotional status. So applications like a person is happy or sad, then I would try to analyze this portion of the brain and get signals from here. And this will give me more information about the emotional status of the person. Parietal lobe gives us the spatial relationship, mathematical capabilities, cognition, and non-verbal memories. So mathematical ability, if you give a person a numerical problem to be solved or a puzzle to be solved, then you will find that there is more electrical activity in this parietal lobe. Occipital lobe is at the back over here, occipital lobe, which actually is regarding the vision that we are having, the color that we see, and the shape. And therefore, when a person gets injury at the back of his head, usually you will find that the vision is disturbed. And this is what you find that the person becomes blind when this area is actually affected. Temporal lobe, a big lobe over here on the side, just above the ears that we are having. It is about the speech and the audio processing and long-term memory. Long-term memory is actually stored over there. So people who are having dementia, this lobe is still more active because they usually have long-term memory. They lose short-term memory. This may be useful for somebody who is more interested in the research in EEG area. This is how the electrodes on the brain, they are placed. There is a standard recording system known as the 1020 system. This is how the electrodes are placed at 10%, 20%, 20% location. So this entire is taken as 100, and this will be 10, 1/10 of that. Then this entire portion is 1/20 and 1/20 and so on. So this is how the electrodes will be placed. Usually we try to have some measurements, or otherwise nowadays we have got electrode caps, which is put on the head, and the person will have to wear it for the recording duration. So that calculation may not be required very much. When we talk about the brain waves, then the EEG signal that is there, it has got some prominent activity, some prominent frequencies are there. The delta frequency, which is the slowest wave, and it has got the highest amplitude. And this wave actually is there when you are deep in sleep. The frequency range, pretty low frequency, 0.5 to 4 hertz. Roughly, again, this is not very strict. Somewhere you may find it is written 3.5. It's okay, but that is the range that is very low frequency. And if you just read the EEG, based upon this activity, you can say that the person is sleeping and he is having a very nice sleep. Then we have got a theta activity, which is there. This frequency range 4 to roughly 8 hertz range is there. And when you are in meditation or when you are drowsy, then this wave, this frequency appears in the EEG. Now, a lot of application again, for example, when you are talking about the road accident, most of the accident occurs when the driver is drowsy. So if you say that you design a system which actually detects drowsiness, this is where you have to look, and you can automatically detect the drowsiness in a person. Or if you are teaching in a class and you have got a device, you can ask your students to put those devices, and then based upon that feedback, you can analyze that whether the lecture was boring or exciting, because drowsiness will indicate that how attentive that person was. Similarly, this is again the frequency range 8 to 13 or 14 hertz range, which is the alpha range. And when you are wakeful and relaxed with eye closed, this is the frequency range. Similarly, beta and gamma. So these are the different frequencies that we usually encounter in the case of EEG and under different activity. So this can be detected, and although there are billions of neurons, but the advantage is that these observations are consistent from all the subjects usually. There may be some outliers, but these observations that we have talked about is consistent, and the results are reproducible. That is most important. Therefore, it can be used in different applications. But of course, there are problems in EEG that when you are doing the recording, there may be various artifacts, and there may be various other factors affecting a person is very much anxious, then he may be actually having the problem that if you are doing a recording and he is not interested, that sort of feeling, he is emotionally charged, that sort of feeling will be reflected. So brain is the place where all those activities are taking place, and therefore if you want to have a single activity for which you want to do the recording, then it becomes very difficult. I'll just straight away go to the case study where I will be talking about the epilepsy and the seizure detection. The problem is very prominent because 80% of the developing country, about 10 million people within India, they are having this problem. They are suffering from here, this sort of seizure problem which is occurring. And this can occur anywhere, anytime. You don't know that. This may cause problem that a person is walking and he suddenly falls and then, or he meets an accident because of these epileptic attack. So if you research upon this area and then you come up with something known as seizure detection or seizure prediction, then it becomes very, very useful. A huge area of application is there. Now, to work in this area, you require data where you are having epilepsy and normal, or the seizure and the normal events are there, the EEG recording. For this, usually the patients are admitted in the hospital for maybe 2, 3, 4 days, and there is a 24/7 recording. So you can just imagine that number of channels, there may be number of electrodes placed, maybe 8 or 16, and then you do the recording for 2, 3 days. And a person who is a neurologist, he has to look into the recording of that many days, page by page, and identify where the seizure is occurring. So it becomes very time consuming and very difficult process. And therefore, it is important that we automate this particular method. For this, Dr. Garima actually worked upon this problem, and we wanted to identify the seizure and the onset detection. And then we wanted to reduce the latency. This is the seizure start, and the red one is the detection. So the algorithm that is detecting is not detecting at the exact location, but slightly shifted. So there is an onset delay. But of course, again, where the seizure is starting, if you go to the neurologist, 2 or 3 of them will never agree with each other. They may have a different starting point. So that is another issue, but the machine that will be doing, it will always be a fixed point based upon the algorithm that has been implemented. So there are various standard data available to us. And this is a Bonn University database which was worked upon, and there were other big database. This is a simple database where 5 classes are there. I will take this example, if the time permits, in MATLAB to show you how we implement the feature extraction. I'm not going into the pre-processing part, but just the feature extraction because the data is pre-processed. So feature extraction and classification. This is what the plot actually looks like of different sets. Set A and B, these are the normal subjects with eye open and eye closed. C and D are the person suffering from epilepsy, but this recording is for the time when they were not having attack. So and E is the recording when there was an epileptic seizure. So you can see that there is a lot of rhythmicity present over here. Amplitude is much higher as compared to others. And the data is pretty clean. And there are hundreds segments like this. So in the case of machine learning, what we try to do is, first of all, do some sort of pre-processing, which is sometimes noise reduction, framing, windowing, all those things. But because the data was clean, over here, we are just talking about the epoch extraction. We will extract the epoch, a segment from the EEG, one segment from the EEG, one channel, and then do the processing, which is feature extraction. Simple feature, mean absolute deviation was actually used per channel or per epoch. And then there was a dimensionality reduction technique, which we have not talked about. And finally, the classification, linear discriminant analysis. This is how we look into that EEG. We take a segment, and this is showing that we are calculating the energy over here. Then we may have another segment, then we may have another segment, and this is how we keep on moving this window till the end. And we calculate the features from each of those epoch per channel. So what we end up with from the first channel, we will have features like this coming from the first channel. From the second channel, these features, I have just shown a single feature, but it can be more than one features over here. And if there are n channels, we may have n set of features coming. And then based upon these, we may try to apply some dimension reduction technique. And based upon those dimensional reduction technique, we may end up with smaller dimensions and ultimate features over here. This actually shows some of those results. I scatter plot of mean value of the median absolute or mean absolute deviation and the maximum value for 2-class problem. You can see that one cluster forming over here, another cluster forming over here. So these are fairly good separated, and therefore we expect that the classifier will be easily differentiating between them. This was the 3-class problem, and this actually shows a 5-class problem. Of course, again, it is showing a clear separation between them. These were some of those results that were obtained by Garima, and you can see that those results were pretty good. And I just shown some of those comparative tables where some of those recently published results she has compared, and she has shown that there was an improvement. For example, over here 100% was there, but 4 features were used per epoch. Here lesser number of features were used. So you improve upon the computational complexity by reducing the number of features, and of course using a very simple classifier, which is a linear classifier. This is the onset detection. Because I'm just looking at the time, and I would like to have some question answer section also. So I will just quickly go to the MATLAB implementation. If you are aware of what about MATLAB, in the first line, what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to go into the directory where the set A data is. So I'm trying to look at the set A data, and then I am dividing the set A data, reading the, we are starting from 3 to 102, because if you give the directory command, then the first 2 values are dot and double dot. Then we start from the 3rd value, and we move up to the final value, that is to 2. And then we will use this loop for the 100 channels. There are 100 channels. So we are having this loop run for 100 channels. And in each channel, we have segmented this into 16 segments, each having 256 samples. So I am just extracting from the EEG data that we are having one segment which is having 256 sample, and then trying to analyze. And like this, I have got 1, or starting from 3, going up to 100 channels. So this 256 value is because of that. Once I get this new data, I am just trying to calculate its energy. And another feature, interquartile range. I'm just trying to take 2 features from these 256 values and then make a feature vector. And this will be stored as new feature in A, which is actually appended in the loop. Similarly, I am using the seizure data, which is set E, and I will do the same processing that I have done over here. I will extract the same set of features, and that will be as Z, feature Z. Now I concatenate those features, all the features, feature of class A and class Z, and then I generate the label, which is value 0 and 1, and put this into a matrix form where all the features are present and corresponding class labels are present. So once I do this, then this is all the programming is required in MATLAB, and the rest of the things are fairly simple. If you are having maybe 2018-19 version of MATLAB onwards, you will have something known as the apps available. On the top, you will find apps over here. And if you click that, there is a machine learning and deep learning app. And in that, you have got deep neural network and classification and learner. So what we will do, we are not doing deep learning. We will do classification and learning app. If you click that app, you will have, have this window coming, that is classification learning app, and it will ask you to start a new session. If you click this new session, you can import the data from the workspace or from the file. Now, what is this data? This data is nothing but the features that we have actually extracted along with their labels. So if I click from the workspace, it will show me the data which is available in the workspace. I can choose the data that I want, which is, you can see feature app data, which is having a dimension of 3200 into 3. Why 3? Because first column is the energy value, second column is the IQR interquartile range, and the third is the label 0 or 1 class. And there are 16, the loop, for loop was for the 16 times, and there were 100 segments. So 1600 for A class and 1600 for the Z class. So it was total 3200. Excuse me. So once you click this data, it will be imported and it shows that column 1 and column 2 type is shown over here, and it asks you whether you want a cross validation or no validation. You can change this slider, choose 5-fold cross validation or 3-fold or fold, and then click on the start session. This is just click over here. As soon as you click the start, you will find that after some time, depending upon the data that you are having, it may take a long time. If it is a huge data, you end up with a scatter plot. Column 1 and column 2 are the two feature vectors that we have shown. And on the top, it shows various options over here. To our interest, first of all, will be the model that we are trying to use. Which classification model we are trying to use, whether we want to have a tree model, we want to have a linear model, whether we want to have a KNN, or we want to go for SVM, what sort of thing we want to choose, we can choose from here. And if you choose all, what I have chosen all, it will actually train and select all the models that are there and give you the results as shown over here. And it is showing that just by using those two features and coarse tree method, there are various tree options. So fine tree is there, medium tree is there, coarse tree is there. So coarse tree method is giving me 99.8% accuracy. And this trained model, these parameters are there, which have been actually used, how much training time, those values are actually shown over here. Which you, if you want to change some of those things, for example, principal component analysis is to be added and all those things that can be done. But from the top, if you select the confusion matrix, it will automatically show you the confusion matrix, the positive rate that you are having and false detection rate that you are having. All those things can be displayed over here just by click of a button. So the area under the curve, it can be also plotted just by using these options. I think that I was asked to be till this particular point. So I would like to stop over here and see if there are questions, because that will be a better option to have interaction with the participants and give answers to their queries.
Thank you so much, sir. Dear participant, if you want to ask any question, you may ask.
See, I am also, because learning, deep learning or machine learning, all those things, I'm also learning along with you all. So I have tried to do something, some justification to this. But still, I am not the expert in this area, and this field is evolving at a very fast rate as well. So if you keep working on a daily basis, still you will be lagging behind it because there are many new networks that are coming on a daily basis. Somebody is saying about the slide sharing. I have most of this slide I have shared with Dr. Garima. She is having those slides. So that can be made available to you depending upon the policy that is being followed over there.
Dear participants, I have enabled your unmute option. You may unmute yourself and you may ask your queries to the sir. Sir, there is one question. Is MATLAB procedure is a programmed?
If MATLAB procedure, I didn't get that question. I cannot see anything on the chat box.
Arpit Kumarji, this question is really incomplete. Please please elaborate it, as it is not clear to us. Is MATLAB procedure is a program? What do you want to ask? You may unmute yourself.
There is a program behind this, of course. And if you want to implement the linear discriminant analysis or the tree method or singular this SVM, then you can implement on your own as well. And those are standard functions available in MATLAB. And these apps are actually useful. See, many times I may not be working in a machine learning area. I may be using machine learning in my area. So I need not write or code this. I just want to prove my concept that, okay, this machine learning algorithm can be used in this application area. So this app becomes very useful for people who just want to do quick concept analysis and see whether the things are working or not. If somebody is working in a core machine learning area, then he may require more detailed programming, optimize their program, run it on a GPU, see how it can be run parallel or do threading over there. So those things are possible, but in most of the cases, we may not be interested in that.
Sir, there is one more question. Python versus MATLAB, which one best for research? This is the question from Radha Krishnanji.
See, again, Python gives you more flexibility. You can write down the program over there. It is possible that you may get many of those latest routines available in Python code, which you can use them. New networks, you can use them. MATLAB may not be that quick to update those new things or learning algorithms or new architectures. So it may take time for MATLAB to do that. But if you are not going for a new architecture, you are trying to use a standard architecture, then MATLAB becomes easier to operate. And people like me, if you have crossed 50, then it is difficult for you to do programming actually, line by line. So MATLAB comes to our help in that case. For example, I can tell you that in deep learning, for example, if you want to implement that, MATLAB even gives you the flexibility that you can have a deep learning Google network and then export that entire network in the form of a MATLAB code as well, where you can edit, modify things.
Sir, okay. Sir, in Python with MATLAB, anyway, you are telling that are going to convert anything in the accelerator part. So architecture part. So all the architectures are synthesized. Suppose if you want to take the Python or MATLAB or any tool, so the final version of the is synthesizable code. So the both are not support for the synthesizable for the architectures. Then what way we can start?
Right. Okay. You are talking about the HDL. Hardware
SDL
description
or
language code you want to implement in embedded system or somewhere like that.
yes, yes, sir. So how you
Okay.
want to evaluate the real-time applications, sir?
Real-time application. Okay. Real-time application. I have not seen in MATLAB because I am more on MATLAB as compared to Python. So I have not
Okay.
seen that real-time application in MATLAB. But what I have found that you have got a possibility from MATLAB to SDL translator, hardware
Yes, sir.
description language.
For the time.
Yes, but if you can generate a code in MATLAB, and that is possible. For example, if you take GoogleNet and then you generate the code for the GoogleNet, and then use this code to generate hardware description language using the MATLAB toolbox itself. It is possible that it may not be very efficient. That is very true. But that can be done.
So it's these codes are simulatable, sir, not for synthesizable. That's the problem we are facing, sir. System generator, if you use system generator, most of the codes are not optimized codes, sir.
No, they are not. They are not optimized.
Yes, in order to optimize the code, it's a very huge task. Suppose if you go for any computational complex higher order, then if you start from MATLAB and then convert it to any other language, again go back to some flow, front-end flows. There are many flows, not in single flow.
That is very true. That's why I said that if you are just trying to prove of concept, then it is okay. But if you say that your core area is implementation, then of course then you have to go for HDL, Verilog, and all those things. That coding is to be done, and then optimization is to be done over there at that level. MATLAB will not do that. MATLAB will do a very rough work over there. Very rough work.
Oh yes.
Good afternoon, sir. I myself Lipika Mondal. I want to ask something.
Yes,
hello.
Please. Yes,
sir. Actually, I am very new in this field, so I want to if the EEG is related to, suppose I want to make a project which is related to some wheelchair. So if and it is just totally depends on the ECG, the EEG of the brain. So how they will be connected? That by the EEG, I want to with the help of the EEG signal, if I want to move right side with only by thinking, if can I move to right side when this type of technology is coming? If I want to go for a project like this, so what is the relation? I mean, how I will start?
So see, what you have to do is that the first thing you should have is a EEG machine. Okay.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir.
Then what you will do is that whatever action you want to have, for example, elbow movement you want to have, or fist movement like this you are trying to have. So you will ask a person to sit down and you will have a recording of the EEG. And if he is imagining this, imagined movement, there are two types of movement. One is the imagined, other is the executed. So if you are talking about the wheelchair movement, then a person will be imagining that it should turn left and it should automatically turn left. That's what you want, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So you will ask your subject to sit down, relax, and imagine to move. Imagine that he has to move left. That imagination should be triggered by some information. For example, then when you are doing the recording, you may have a display on the screen and there is a bulb or anything that glows up, and he should start imagining that, okay, at this point he was imagining left movement. This time he was imagining right. So you have to design an experiment protocol in which the first second may be left imagination, then the second after that a pause, and then there will be an imagination on the right. And then you have to record that EEG, number of channels, 8 channel maybe. And not only one, but you will have multiple trials of that subject. Okay. And then not only stopping to that subject, you will have multiple subjects then. And once you are having that, you know when the recording started and when he imagined that movement. That because that time marking should be there. So you will look into the portion of the EEG and see that what information you can extract from there about that movement which is not present in the other background. Because
After that, I
everything
have
is
to program it
controlled by brain.
accordingly. After that, I have
Yes.
to program it accordingly.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, sir.
And
Thank
of course, you have to do some pre-processing because the data that you will be collecting, the person may have some eye movement also,
Yes, sir.
and he may have some movement, so artifacts will be there. So you need to filter out those things. There will be an interference with the 50 hertz, so you need to suppress that line frequency as well.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Sir, can be programmed MATLAB for genome sequencing procedure by using different databases?
Yes, you can you can program using genome sequence as well, and in the app they have got simulation biology analyzers and model builder where you can use those things. I have not used personally because that is not my area. Way back in 2003 or 4, I did something of microarray data analysis and classification using those ACTG sequence. But that was much simpler. And now MATLAB has got a specific toolbox for that analysis as well. So it can be done over there.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Any more queries? So I think there is no more query from the participant.
What I could say is that if you are having any more query or anything, then you can direct it to Dr. Garima and she will be in a position to answer most of them. That there will not be a issue.
Okay,
So
sir.
and she is with you for the next few days, so that those issues can be sorted out. Plus the presentation is with Dr. Garima, so she can share with those things.
Sir, we will share all the recording sessions with the participants for all the sessions, so they will have no problem in that thing. And really, sir, I want to say thanks from my heart. मैं सबको ये बताना चाहूँगी कि I did PhD under the guidance of sir, and even I have learned ABC of MATLAB from sir only. Really, sir, thank you so much, sir, for accepted invitation of madam. HOD मैम को भी मैं thanks बोलूँगी कि उन्होंने आपको invite किया for this FTP. Sir, thank you so much, sir, for giving your time.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to interact with you all, and it was nice talking to you. Maybe some overlap was there. I'm not sure about that, but I tried to quickly go through some of those things.
Sir, please share contact detail or email ID, sir.
Yeah, see, Garima ma'am is in
Yes,
charge.
sir.
She can share anything and everything.
So
She
you
knows.
all are connected with me through WhatsApp group of this FDP. So if someone asks anything, want to ask anything, they may contact to me directly. So there is no issue.
She was earlier my student, but now she is my family member.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, really, sir. So really, it's my honor. Sir, thank you. मैं end करती हूँ session.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, sir. Really. Dear participants, we will rejoin at 2:30 p.m. for our last session of this day. Thank you, everyone.